Hi, everyone. Good morning. This is Linda Blanchet with ISGAP, and I hope I will be speaking with each of you over the next few days. But it's my great privilege and pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Professor Joël Kotek, faculty of ISGAP, and Professor of Political Science at the Free University of Brussels. His bio is very long, and you can find it in the program book. I encourage you to have a look at it. And also, Professor Kotek has the distinction of having been a speaker at ISGAP since the beginning, which we've lost count now, at least 10 years. So we'll figure that out, but welcome back. We're so delighted to have you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And first, I want to stress that I'm a French speaker, so I will make a lot of mistakes in English. So be nice with me, okay? You will see on the discussion. So what I will try today to speak about is why anti-Semitism. It's the explanation, the political explanation. And that's why I say why the Jews and not the Italians. And it seems to be a little bit awkward to speak about why the Jews and not the Italians. But it's very simple, because as you know, the Jews were accused of being responsible of Christ's condemnation, death, and also being responsible of to be the main bankers in the medieval society. But the fact is that those responsible of Jesus, crucifixion, they were the Romans, of course, and certainly not the Jews. And the main bankers in the Middle Age, they were the Italians, the Lombards, and especially if you remember the people from Tuscany, the family, the famous Medicis, they were bankers. And they create the florin, the gold standards in the sense of this period. And despite this, people will remember that the Jews killed Jesus and the Jews were responsible of the economical misfortune of the people in the Middle Age. So this was my introduction. And what is interesting also to stress for the beginning is the fact that, if you consider Jewish history, there is no refusal to integration. It means what the Jews were asking was the right to resemble and not much more than, the right to be different. And if you analyze, the worst moment of, Jewish persecution, the worst moments were when the Jews used to be quite well integrated in their society. If you think about Alexandria in the antiquities, the Jews lost Hebrew. That's why they translate actually the Torah into Greek. When you speak about, Christian Spain or Muslim Spain, etc., the fate of Maimonides, who was forced to leave, Spain, even if its language he was writing actually in Arabic, of course in Hebrew too, but in Arabic. And you speak about the Dreyfus, France during the Dreyfus affair, where the Jews were quite integrated, and of course the Weimar Republic, which was also, at least the Germans believe, was a great period for the German Jewry, etc. And then you can see some example of Jewish integration. My first pictures is it's Dura Europos in the Hellenistic time. It's a synagogue, well preserved, that you can find today in Syria. Then you will find Jews from India, Jews from Ethiopia, Jews from China. Then you will see Jews from the Ottoman Empire, dressed exactly like Ottomans, more or less. A Jew from Morocco. And then the last one, the ginger, the red-haired man. How do you know that he was a Jew? How can you guess that he is a Jew? He has a yellow badge. And this is the fact is that the only way to recognize a Jew is just to mark him. It was in the Middle Age that first in Baghdad, it was during Harun al-Rashid that the Jews were forced to wear a yellow scarf or whatever, or a yellow, I would say, hat, in the 8th century after Christ. And then in Germany also, and then in France, they were supposed to wear the rouelle. And then, of course, the Germans forced the Jews to wear the yellow star, which means that, the only way to differentiate Jews from another one is to mark him. And of course, this is a good example. In September 1939, the Germans crushed Poland. They invaded Poland quite successfully. And, the Berliner Tagesblatt, they decided to show one of, the beautiful soldiers behind this tremendous victory. And unfortunately, they didn't know, but this man, you know, is a Jew. His father actually was a Jew, not his mother, Werner Goldberg. And of course, when they discovered that he was from Jewish origin, he was immediately expelled from the army in April 1940. He was not killed because, you know, he was half Jewish, he was a Mischlinger, etc., but he was forced to work in an ammunition factory, etc. And even if, you know, Jews looks like their neighbors, this is, you know, the current representation of the Jews. One from Austria, the other one for Russia. It means that the Jewish, I would say, face, it's a production of graphics, a graphic, etc. And this is a French representation. You can see the classical face that we know what was supposed to be how a Jew looks like, etc. And to arrive to this conclusion that what is anti-Semitism? It's a social disease. This is very important. For me, it's a disease, and it's not my idea. It's also the idea of Leon Pinsker, who was one of the founder of Zionism in Russia. And according to me, well, at the first, anti-Semitism, it's a neurosis of religious origin that will be transmuted into individual and or collective psychosis. So if you know the difference between a neurosis and a psychosis, of course I know there is a psychiatrist here and he won't listen to me, but according to normal people, I would say 1 + 1 means 2 for a normal person. For a psychotic, 1 + 1 will mean 3, a million, maybe 2, etc. But you know, something irrational, etc. A fake answer, etc. And for a neurotic person, 1 + 1 means what? For a neurotic person, it means 2. But this reality makes him nervous. It's, you know, a neurotic person is someone who refuses to be faced with the reality, etc. And this is for me the case of anti-Judaism. And in my presentation, I make a differentiation between anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. For me, it's two things totally different. Of course, it participates to the same idea, but it's different. Anti-Judaism, it's the hatred of Judaism, the religion. It's rational, in a sense, religiously rational. Anti-Semitism, it's a psychosis against the Jews as evil person, etc. And I will explain to you when the neurosis will become a psychosis, and according to me, it's not in the 19th century when the word anti-Semitism was invented, but in the 13th, 12th century after the Crusades, etc. So anti-Semitism doesn't speak to us of Jews, but of course of society in crisis or mutation. And what is the basic idea? This is my definition, of course. You know, you've got 1,000 different definitions of what anti-Semitism is, but this is my definition. My definition is the Jews are responsible for the misfortune of the world. This is anti-Semitism, not anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism. And this is important for me to stress if you want to understand why I start anti-Semitism in the 12th, 13th century, etc. And I say then and now. Then you see at the end of the 19th century this very famous motto, die Juden sind unser Unglück. And you can see that today, in contemporary Germany, of course they won't say Judaism as such, or the Jews, they will say Zionism or Israel ist unser Unglück. Nothing has really changed. It's just an adaptation, and this means that anti-Semitism is a polymorphous and syncretic form of hatred that affects all social and political backgrounds, which strikes people of the right, of the left, as well Christian and Muslim, etc. And this is an example of the extreme right. This is, you know, David Duke, former Ku Klux Klan leader, etc., who pretend that, you know, COVID-19 was an invention, was a creation of the Zionists, etc. And so, of course, you know, there were a lot of conspiracy theory during COVID-19, etc. This is from the far right. This is the far left. This is, you know, a poster that was produced 3 months ago by the extreme leftists. You heard about Mélenchon, LFI in France, etc. And Mélenchon, they decided to organize a demonstration against extreme right in France. And to denounce extreme right, they portray a very famous Jew, I would say, a television man. I would say rightist, but who cares? It means, and he was to be the personification of, the danger of the extreme right in France, which is totally absurd. But what is interesting is that, he looks like a poster that was produced in 1941 in Antwerp and in Amsterdam, the ewige Juden. And also, when, of course, you saw, they say, it's not our fault, it's the artificial intelligence who produced the poster. But artificial intelligence, they does what you want, of course it means. They say, please, make the portrait of Anuna as anti-Semitic as possible, etc. And he looks like the devil. And finally, they took the poster away. They were a little bit annoyed. This is another example that you can find. This is in Belgium, my country. This is a certain person called Van Rooij. I don't know her, etc. But what is interesting, there is totally uninhibited anti-Semitism in Belgium in the name of good, of course. It's a virtuous anti-Semitism. And I will quote, not a single thing has changed in the last 77 years. Israel brutality has simply expanded, become more sadistic and all-encompassing. A Zionist regime has no more right to exist than a Nazi regime. They are both built on extermination, refuse, reject, and resist Zionism, etc. And this is very common that you can find on Facebook and so on. So as Rafik said yesterday, well, the Jews is the Jewish contemporary cancer. The Jews are evil, and everything evil is Jewish. And this is some example that you can find on the internet. Gaddafi, of course, was presented by the opposition as a Jew, as a Moroccan Jew, or I don't know, whatever. Then you see Baghdadi, then you see Morsi. The most funny one is, Assad, representing as a Hasid from Antwerp or New York. And then Ghanouchi, who was the leader of the Islam Brotherhood in Tunisia, also represented as Hasid. And of course, the best is El-Baghdadi, and this is taken from extreme right website, French one. They say that the real name of El-Baghdadi is Simon Elliott, who was from, he was an agent of the Mossad and from Jewish Moroccan origin. It's absurd, but this is the reality of today. From the extreme right, extreme left, from radical Islamists, etc., which is what is bad is supposed to be Jewish. McDonald's is a Jewish Zionist, which is absurd. Of course, hamburgers, don't eat hamburgers because it's supposed to be a Jewish product. If you drink Coca-Cola, you support Israel. I've got hundreds of posters denouncing Coca-Cola as a Zionist or anti-Palestinian, beverage whatsoever. And of course, you know that Pepsi-Cola means pay every pence to save Israel. That's why I don't drink Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola anymore. Or, on the other version, pay every penny saving Israel. I don't know what's the reality of Pepsi. I don't know, and I don't want to know. So anti-Semitism is a revelation of the deadly tension that arises in critical period of history. And it begins as a Jew, as we said yesterday, and it's not only Elie Wiesel, but also Yehuda Boer. It started, 6 million Jews were killed, but 50 million Europeans finally were killed during this war. So let's stress the difference between ordinary racism and xenophobia. So what is important to stress is anti-Semitism is first and foremost, and I will demonstrate it, a conspiracy theory. And this is very important. The Jews are not Untermensch, they're not subhuman, they're not considered as inferior. They are superior, but superior in evil, etc. They are a danger. And because they plot to destroy yesterday the Christian society, today the Muslim city, etc. Classical representation of the Rothschild or whatsoever, the Jewish danger whatsoever. They try to control the world, they spread blood, etc. They like money and they like blood. And the protocol of the elders of Zion, and you can see that the Jews is a nuisible, it's a danger. It's not someone you can enslave. It's someone that you have to get rid definitely of. They are responsible of the misfortune of Nazi Germany, for instance, through the Masonry, Freemasonry. And you can see this is a poster produced in Serbia in 1943. All the Jews of Serbia were already killed But, this poster represents, a Jewish Mason, manipulating both Churchill and Joseph Stalin, etc. And it means that anti-Semitism, it's totally irrational, totally absurd, of course. And this is something more contemporary. Someone called David Dees, an American illustrator, who died 2 years ago from cancer. He used to be he's an extremely good illustrator. He used to work for Disney, he used to work for Sesame Street, and then he was using ink, and he was infected by the ink he was using. And he had he became ill and he became anti-Semitic. It was connected. He believed that the chemical industry were responsible, and chemical industry, the Jewish industry. So he became a fanatical anti-Semite, and you can find on the website maybe 200 very interesting anti-Semitic posters, illustration. And this was interesting because according to David Dees, the great replacement, the fact that Muslim and black people will take over in Europe, it's a Jewish plot. Of course not Jewish, Zionist, which is important to say. And that Merkel, Cameron, it's old. Merkel, Cameron, and Sarkozy, they were puppet of the Zionists, etc. And that immigration is the Zionist weapon of European genocide. This is very interesting to stress. This is another David Dees. You can see, the reptilian conspiracy, more or less, the fact that we are controlled by reptilian. And you see the Rothschild, of course, the heart of the Rothschild, and you see that all, and it's an old one, and you can see because you still have Clinton, etc., and you can see that even Trump is being manipulated by the Jewish evil, etc. And this is anti-Semitism, etc. And this makes the difference. So the Jews helps to explain what I call the what went wrong, and this is important. It's very useful, of course. And you remember during COVID-19, the fact that, and of course if there are Chinese in the audience, they will be happy to know that it's not a Chinese flu, it's a Jewish flu. And this was quite spread on the website, etc. And you can see Mashiach no whatsoever. Again, the Jews use COVID-19 to promote the genocide of the white race whatsoever. And this was in France. The Minister of Health was of Jewish origin. Her father actually was a survivor of Auschwitz. And look how she was portrayed. She was, taking responsible of COVID-19. Why do you persecute me? And then you can see there, you can see a reminiscence of, a middle-age accusation of the Jews poisoning the well. And you can see that the only way to understand anti-Semitism is to go back to history, and the medieval history. If not, you can't understand it. And this is the core of what I try to say. And this is a speech made by the Houthi in a mosque in Yemen. And it's very interesting. So coronavirus is part of a plan by the Jews, Israel, US, to control Mecca, Medina. And the Saud clan is a Jewish family brought into power in order to Judaize those cities. It's absurd, but, well, it explains a lot. And it shows that anti-Semitism, it's a real psychosis, etc. You know also how it was used by the Germans, ultra-right, extreme right, proto-fascist, 1919. If the Germans and the Austrians lost the First World War, it was because of, the Jews behind, the scene who betrayed the German and the Austrian army. Look how the Austrian Republic is represented. She is represented as a Jewish republic. It's absurd, but it worked. And this facilitate Hitler's arrival to power, etc. This is a very old, this is 2015, Ukraine already. Ukraine's supposed to be run by miserable Jews, etc. So what is anti-Semitism? Anti-Semitism is a cultural code that strikes society even without Jews. And I will show you some example, funny example, because in a sense, if you work on this, I think it's funny because it's so absurd. This is, I don't know if he's an historian whatsoever. This man spread the rumor that Enola Gay, the name of the bomber, responsible of Hiroshima, means in Yiddish, kill the emperor. It means you have to be totally insane for such an explanation. Of course, in Araguez, you see, was the name of the bomber. So again, Maduro, explaining its problem by the fact that he was, attacked by international Zionism, etc. And then, if you're interested in, I'm a genocide specialist, and I'm working on Rwanda, and you can see that the Great Lake in Congo, and not only in Congo, the Tutsi are supposed to be, well, more or less the puppet of the Zionists, and there is a kind of Zionist Tutsi plot against, the Bantu of Central Africa, etc. And voilà. Great Lake, the Israelo-Zionist way, etc. And this is a very funny, also funny, and it shows the interests of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. There was a debate in the Egyptian television and between an intellectual, a sociologist, and a religious man, and you can see that both claim that the Jews are responsible. Sheikh claims that there is a Jewish plot to decrease Egypt's population, and the political sociologists claim there is a plot to increase it. So whether it's increase or a decrease, it's a Jewish plot. And this is interesting, this is very interesting. The same in Turkey, in a main, a daily newspaper, Daily Sabah, you can see that who is responsible of the Armenian genocide? The Jewish and the Freemason, of course. We're not responsible. They force us, etc. So the question is, blame the Jews. Blame the Jews. This is the reality. And, well, some of them are Jews, Madoff, unfortunately, but Tsipras certainly not, and he was denounced by the extreme right as being of Jewish origin whatsoever. So anti-Semitism is a cultural code that strikes even non-Jewish people who are supposed to be Jewish, following the example, for instance, of Blair and Macron. I show Blair because it shows that it's very old, it dates, years ago. And unfortunately, holywar.org is a Catholic, used to be a Catholic website, and unfortunately it was closed. And so when those kind of websites close, I'm not very happy because, I have no access, to direct, problem of this disease, etc. And this is Macron. Macron, who is now despised by the, let me see, ultra-right Zionists, because Macron is supposed to be pro-Palestinian whatsoever. But this is David Dees' representation of Macron. David Dees, this American crazy illustrator. And you can see that Macron is the puppet, again, of the Rothschild house, that he read the Protocol of the Wise of Zion, that he is a Freemason, the J, it's a sign of the Freemason on the other side of the Rothschild Bank, and he is also responsible of the white genocide. You can see, again, this, great replacement, crazy theory, etc. And Macron is the puppet of the Jews, of Rothschild, even if it's not Rothschild. It's Soros. But, of course, you can guess that anti-Semites are very often idiots, but not always, unfortunately. But anyway, it's Soros, but he's, etc. So difference with racism and ordinary xenophobia, it's, well, anti-Semitism is a demonology, and this is very important. It's a dangerous being because of its relationship with the forces of evil. And this is the core. The Jews help to explain the existence of evil. And this is also taken the idea from Freud, because the problem is, well, we were supposed to be, well, in a peaceful, after the venue of the Christ, of Jesus, there should be peace and harmony, and it's not the case. There are wars, diseases, whatsoever. So the only way to save God is to say, well, it's because of the devil. So the existence of the devil, it's extremely important to save God, to save the religion, etc. But, the devil, it's an abstract thing. So you need more, you need agent. And the agent are the Jews. The Jews, being the agent of the devil, are responsible of the failure of God. And that's why it's important also to help the Jews, etc. And this idea, it's very old. It's in the Middle Age. And you can see, and this is, it's a conspiracy. You can see that the Sanhedrin, the elders of Zion, are plotting with devil to kill the Christ. And this is not 19th century France, 20th century Germany. Well, we are 11th, 12th century Europe, etc. And you can see how you recognize the Jews by the Judenhut. It means the Jewish hat. And so the Jews are, agents of the devil. And it's explained, And this is 12th century, actually. And this is the last cover of an anti-Semitic, of a Nazi magazine called Kladderadatsch. I think it's April, it's written, but I can't see. It's June 1944. It's the last cover because after Kladderadatsch won't get any papers because it's the end, not the end, but anyway, it's the end of the publication. And you can see President Roosevelt being also the puppet of the Jews and the devil. And this explains why finally Germany will be defeated, because they are fighting not the Americans, they are fighting the devil. And this is a poster that you could find. Maybe it was destroyed by the recent bombing, because I know that Palestine Square was bombed in the 12 Days War. And this was in the poster that you could find in Palestine Square in Tehran. It was taken by one of my students. And of course, you can see this is Israel. We love Israel, but look how Israel is portrayed, etc. So the Jews are not Untermensch. The Slav are Untermensch, Afro-American are Untermensch, etc. But not the Jews. The Jews are Unmensch. They are beyond. It's a disease, the Jews. And so you have two solutions: whether you have to purify and to expel, or finally you can exterminate. And so at the beginning it was more expel. And this is a postcard that was, published, issued by an hotel before First World War in Germany, in Bochum. Bochum is like, I don't know, it's like Deauville in France, it's on the Baltic. And this is, and it's a publicity of the hotel, and say, in this hotel no Jews are accepted. So be sure. You won't meet a Jew in this hotel, etc. This is the Node Hotel, and this hotel said also it's Judenfreies Hotel. It's an hotel without Jews. Be reassured, etc. And this is in Quebec. We are in July 1939. In Quebec, they say Jews here in Saint-Agathe, they're not wanted. It's not, and this is also, and this is 39, Quebec, Canada. And then you can see America. But because a lot of you are American, etc. This is a very nice hotel, Art Deco, Miami. We are in May 1944, 1 month before, the invasion, the liberation of France. And then this hotel is, restricted clientele, which means no Jews. No Jews in this hotel. Allowed. Another beautiful hotel, I prefer the other one actually. And this hotel is forbidden to Jews too. It said, in a more precise word, strictly Gentile clientele. Of course, people will say, and the American, Afro-American, of course they can't enter. Of course, by definition. But the difference between a Jew and a non-Jew, it means an African, you can see it immediately. A Jew, it's difficult. So a Jew, he looks like you. So how would you do it? But you have to say, you're not welcome. That's the big difference, of course. And origin of BDS already, we are in 1906, done by Jewish products, etc. And so the other solution will be, you can exterminate them also, or at least, so to expel them. And this is postcards before, again, the First World War. What's the future of the Jew, whether they're rich, they're poor, they're children, women, whatsoever. They have to go to Palestine. Today they say out of Palestine. Then it was go to Palestine, nach Palästina, etc. The same in other postcards, Germans, they say, again, you have to go to Palestine, even if even if you die, because you can see there, it's exactly what happened to the Armenians in 1915. They died in the desert of Iraq, Syria, and Anatolia, etc. And it's the same here. So what is a Jew? The Jew is a parasite. And this is a book that was produced for the Wehrmacht, not the SS, 1944, where almost all the Jews were already killed. And then on the other side, you've got a poster. You can see what the Jew really is a danger for humanity. I don't know how to say this in English, but anyway, you know. And what is interesting to see that you can see that the Jew is whether communist, whether capitalist. You can see on the eye swastika and, no, not swastika, the dollars on one side and the Soviet, you know, faucille et marteau on the other side, etc. So a Jew is well pest. It's a world pest, etc. And of course, how would you deal with a pest? There is no, you can't discuss with. The only way is extermination, etc. We are in 1939, and this is posters that were produced in occupied Poland, and representing, you know, the danger of the Jews for the Polish Christian society. Jews are lice; they cause typhus, etc. 1941, and this is my favorite. It's a French poster edited by not the Nazis but Vichy France, and they say tuberculosis, syphilis, cancer are curable. Well, it was then, maybe, I don't know, in France. But we have to finish with the biggest disease, and the biggest disease is the Jews. And then you can see Jews is special, is a cancer, etc. And this is a modern interpretation of this. This is Erbakan, you know. He's the son of the former Turkish prime minister, you know, one who was actually who trained Erdogan, and he said, although we lack evidence, this virus serves the objective of Zionism to reduce the population and prevent it from growing. Zionism is a 15-year-old bacterium causing people suffering, a bacterium. Well, the only way is antibiotic, yeah, if you want to get rid of. And it's interesting, it doesn't say Jewish, it says Zionism, but even the Jewish people is no 5,000 years old. It means the Chinese, I suppose, the Egyptians for sure, the Indians, the Jews, only 3,000. Well, it's not so bad compared to the Belgian, it's 200, but let's say. So, of course, let's have a little bit of fun. So it means that, of course, well, of course, yeah, death to all Jews. As I say, sometimes, you know, there are some idiots, and of course, I suppose there were protestation of the fruit producer of California, or Pluto, Florida, because asking for the killing of Jews, I think it was terrible. So why Jews? And this is important. Of course, they are the usual suspect, it's true, but it's not sufficient, and I will demonstrate it. Because something will say, well, it's a scapegoat. Okay, but I will explain to you that it's not by hazard that he was chosen as a scapegoat. It's necessary, but definitely not enough to understand it. So let's speak about the scapegoat. You know, it's a crystallization of persecution on an individual is often associated with the phenomenon of the scapegoat, highlighted, as you know, by René Girard, the French historian. The odds against one manifests itself through the process of designating a scapegoat that allows the group to rebuild its unity against the person through the sharing of a hateful emotion. This is a very good drawing, not an anti-Semitic. It's incredible. I've got two non-anti-Semitic illustration. This was made by Abel Pan, a Russian one, who actually will immigrate to Eretz Israel. And it's 1915. We are during the First World War. And it shows that everyone agrees who is responsible of the butchery. And you say France showed Germany, Germany, Great Britain, Turkey, Russia or Italy, whatsoever. And finally they all agree, the Jews. And of course the Jew is small, because the Jews, of course, is powerless. And you better have a powerless scapegoat than a strong scapegoat, because, of course you say the Jews are very strong, but you know that he is not, by definition. And this is another one, 30 years after, made by Wu, a German illustrator, during the Weimar, and he stressed the fact that, everyone agrees, whether the communist or the extreme right or the conservative, that the Jews are responsible of the misfortune of Germany. And this poor illustrator killed himself, committed suicide in 1914, trying to escape France to Spain, like Walter Benjamin. So there is no historical fatality, and this is also important to stress, to the hatred of Jews. There is no eternal anti-Semitism. It's totally wrong. The hypothesis of eternal anti-Semitism has no historical basis. In pre-Christian North Africa, in traditional China or India, Jews did not suffer any particular discrimination, unlike other minorities. It doesn't mean that they were well accepted, but it means, according to my definition of anti-Semitism, Jews being responsible of the misfortune of the world, I don't think there was an emperor in China, or I don't know, who would say that the Jews are responsible of, I don't know, a disease whatsoever. And most important is the Roman Empire. During the Roman Empire, it means there were no anti-Semitism as such. Maybe in Alexandria, but it's another problem. But in the Roman Empire, no emperor would say that Vesuvius, eruption was caused by the Jews, or that, I don't know, the pest, the black, there was a lot of diseases was created by the Jews, or the barbarians invasion was it was a Jewish plot. Of course not. Maybe there was anti-Judaism, because the Jews were admired and despised. Why? Because the Jews it's a strange people. Let's say the truth. The Jews are very strange. We have to accept it. It's strange people. And some Romans believed that the Jews were, atheists. Why? Because they didn't believe, they didn't believe in gods. They believe also they were insane because they didn't kill their handicapped children at the birth. And also they believed that Jews were lazy because they invented the weekend, Shabbos. So, okay, strange people. But there was kind of attraction to the Jews, etc. And even if they were at war, because there was a terrible war between, Judea and between, of course, the Roman Empire. It was, So why? Why? How do you explain anti-Semitism? The only way to understand, I think, and it's my theory, but I'm not the only one, it's a limited hostility to the Abrahamic religion. Anti-Judaism and then anti-Semitism is part of the precise temporal and spatial framework of the establishment of both sides of the Mediterranean, of Christianity and Islam, two religions directly derived from Judaism and therefore rivals. You have to understand this. This is the core. Judaism is a competing face, and what is more, and this is really, it's the matrix. You cannot understand Islam, you cannot understand Christianity without Judaism. All the concept of Christianity are Jewish concept. Apocalypse, it means the fact that the Messiah, it means the Christ, all the prophecy, it's Judaism, point, etc. And you cannot. And it's the same for Islam. It's not the case for the Roman religion. The Roman religion, they look to the Greeks. And the Buddhists, they look to the Hinduism, etc. The Christian and the Muslim, they look to the Father's face and to Judaism, etc. And this is what Judaism, anti-Judaism is. Okay? And this is different from anti-Semitism. Anti-Judaism is a rational opposition. Rational in the sense that if you're a Christian, you don't like Judaism. If you're a Jew, you don't like Christianity too, it means anti-Judaism, it's an opposition to the Jews for what they are. It means what? They are Jews. They believe that Jesus is not, the Messiah, the Christ, and that Muhammad is not the prophet. People who decided not to work on Saturday and not Friday or Sunday, Samedi, it's in French, dimanche, Sunday, and which means also that Judaism is pivotal. You know, they choose a day before, a day after Shabbos, etc. So who fast on Yom Kippur, not in Ramadan or Lent? And so, of course, the opposition can be violent, by definition, of course. And this is an example of a father of the Orthodox Church, Oriental Church, called Chrysostom, Jean Chrysostom, and he says, the synagogue, 4th century, the synagogue is worse than a brothel. It is the den of scoundrels and the repair of wild beasts, the temple of demons devoted to idolatrous cults. Of course, it's violent, but still, it's more, I would say, anti-Judaism than anti-Semitic. And of course, sometimes it could be violent. For instance, there were, you know, how finally the Jews of Hejaz, of what is called now Saudi Arabia, finally they were definitely expelled. Because if you read the Quran, you will say that there were many Jews in today's Saudi Arabia. The Medina was a Jewish oasis. They were maybe more important than the Christian, than the pagans, etc. So, and they were expelled through violence, etc. And this is an example. All men killed, possession divided, women and children taken captive and converted. Some people compare the fate of those Jews with 7 October, more or less. This is the Khaybar massacre, 1 year after, May 628, which is the end of Jewish presence, more or less, in Saudi Arabia, of today's Saudi Arabia. And what is important about Khaybar is very often in Belgium, in Antwerp, in Brussels, or in Paris, when you have demonstration against Israel, they would say, Khaybar, Khaybar, all the Jews to the gas, etc. Khaybar still has a signification, you know. This is the pogrom in Morocco, 1911, etc. So what is anti-Judaism? As I said, it's a neurosis. It's a cognitive dissonance. It's an internal tension specific to the thought system, etc. Dissonance occurs when a person is confronted with information that is not consistent with their belief. And I will explain. And there's one sentence, if you want to remember, to remind what I said, is Daniel Sibony, very clever French intellectual, and he has this sentence, very clear. I think it's, unfortunately, it's not mine. The origin of hatred is the hatred of origin. This is the origin of anti-Semitism. The origin of the anti-Semitism is the hatred of origin. And what is the origin of Christianity and Islam? It's Judaism. You have to accept it, and it's difficult. Problem one, why? Christianity and Islam present themselves as the only heir of Judaism. We are the real Jews at the beginning. We are the Verus Israel. It means the real, the true Israel, against whom the Vetus Israel. What is Vetus? It's the old. It's caduc, it's finished. Okay, you had a special relation with God, but it's finished. We are the real one. But the problem is that how can you claim an inheritance when the legatee is not dead in any way, does not recognize you as heir? Because the rabbi didn't accept. They didn't accept Jesus. Most of them, because some rabbis did convert, of course. The first Christians were Jewish, actually, as you know. And this is the problem. And though the gospel, like the Quran, are essentially based on biblical stories, like, you know. So it means that those who refuse to disappear and recognize you control the initial and founding myth. An example is the sacrifice of Abraham or Ishmael, according to certain Muslim tradition. Of course, if it's Ishmael, it means that the people blessed by God are the Arabs, not the Jews. And if it's Isaac, it means are the Jews. And of course, it's a quarrel, it's a problem, even if the Quran was written 1,000 years after, and it's not actually in the Quran, it's more in the tradition, etc. And also, it's really it's problem, not for me, because I'm not a believer and I don't believe that Abraham ever existed. I'm sorry, but for them it's very important. And I wanted to say something, but I forgot. So, and this is the core, I would say, of the question. And so it means there are jealousy and envy, and this is also the core. You know, jealousy, it's not only despise, it's jealousy and envy. And it's normal that both Christianity and Islam will logically came to oppose the mother religion. And it's the opposition of to the father that inspires the relationship between Judaism and its two religions. It's a family quarrel. And the worst quarrel are family quarrel. Look at the first crime in the Bible. Two brothers. Look at the first crime in Roman history. Two brothers, Romulus and Remus. And my idea is then, if you're a Muslim, of course, if you want to trace a genealogy, you will look to the Torah. And in the Torah, they saw, Abraham is a child with Agar. And so it means this is our ancestor. They look to the Bible. The Roman, when they were looking for their genealogy, they were looking in what book? What was the tradition for a Roman? What was the people to be connected with? It was the Greeks. So they were looking to the Iliadus and Odysseus. And Virgil, he opened the books and he said, our ancestor is Aeneas. You know Aeneas? I don't know how to say it in English. The prince, Aeneas. This is our ancestor. And this is important to stay. And this is the core. It's a family quarrel, etc. And so there are 4 stages of anti-Judaism, not anti-Semitism, anti-Judaism. The first is identification. We are the real Jews. The second one is incomprehension. But we are accept us. We are the Verus Israel, etc. And this is the case of the first Christian and the first Muslim. But why don't you accept it? And so there is a morbid jealousy and also an admirative hatred. Because at the beginning, the first Christian, they need rabbis to help us to understand the Torah. And then become the pure hatred. And this is the case of beginning of Islam. At the beginning of Islam, Muhammad was praying to Jerusalem, and he was fasting on Yom Kippur, and it's Ashura. And finally, when the rabbis refused to convert, he decided to create Ramadan. And it's the same with Luther. Luther, at the beginning, he was pro-Jewish. He believed that, by transforming Catholicism, he will bring the Jews to his new faith. The refusal of the rabbi makes him completely mad, and he wrote one of the first anti-Semitic pamphlet, The Jews and their Lies, etc. So how could you cope with neurosis? What could be the solution? The first solution was servitude and humiliation. Jews as a necessary evil, an error in the service of truth. In the 4th century, Saint Augustine wrote that the Jews should not be killed, but condemned to dispersion and humiliation as a sign of the church victory of the synagogue. Condemnation of eternal servitude, and the example is the wandering Jews. The Jews, they cannot go back to Israel. They are doomed till the end, till their conversion, etc. And so I will ask you, who was the last European country to recognize Israel? No, the last European country, last state. Vatican, of course, because recognize Israel, of course. It means that Saint Augustine was wrong, etc. So the second solution is criminalization. And so this was the invention of deicide. The people of the Holy Alliance is responsible for Jesus' death. Then Islam, it's propheticide. I don't know if it exists. Maybe I invented it. It's the people of the First Alliance refused to recognize the last prophet and poisoned him. There is tradition that Muhammad was actually poisoned by a Jewish slave. And this is an example that you can find on the internet, the fact that the Jews, that that he was poisoned by Jew, etc. And the same with Arafat, who was also poisoned whatsoever. The continuation of old myth, etc. Solution 3. The Christian response, it's theology of replacement, of substitution, etc. And this is different between anti-Judaism and antisemitism. You can see that this is in anti-Judaism, the Jew is still a human person. It's a human person, okay, a human person that, is in the error. Okay? But still, it can be saved by the conversion. And the spear is the broken alliance, and still there is the Torah. It's still there, the Torah. It's still there, but more or less. It means that this is the difference between anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. It's still a human person, etc. The solution 3, it's the Muslim response. It's called theology of falsification. The Muslim is different. They say that the Torah and the Gospel were forged. The real Torah, the real Gospel announced, Muhammad as the last prophet. Because the problem is they knew that the Quran was written 1,000 years before. So, how could you cope with this? The only way is to say that the Quran was written with the creation of the world. It's written directly by God when the world was created. And then you can see, according to the Quran, the sacrifice cannot be Isaac. According to authentic Islamic tradition, the sacrifice is Ishmael. The Muslim scholars have solved this case a long time ago, very early in history of Islam, etc. Let the Christian missionaries study the Quran thoroughly before calling upon ghosts that will frighten nobody built themselves, etc. So consequence 1, the Jews are at once totem and taboo. Again, a Freudian concept, and vile, despised, humiliated, but still sacred and useful. I have no time to explain this. They were useful. The consequence 2, the Jews are going to constitute the only minority tolerated within Christian and Muslim state, and they will become gradually the usual suspect and ideal scapegoat. And of this religion hostility to the Jews, but set up gradually as a biblical code, will arise at first traditional, then modern anti-Semitism, then etc. So difference, again, anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. Anti-Judaism is not exterminationists. And this is a good example. It's a poster produced during Belgium occupation, 1941, December. The Germans has already decided to kill all the Jews. The Shoah. On the same, parallelly, there was a campaign launched by the church to convert the Jews. The Jews can be saved. They say conversion of the enemy of God. You imagine? So the quarrel is theological, and after all, logical, if we think of the exclusivism of monotheist belief. And there is what will bring the neurosis to psychosis. And it's the accusation of the deicide. It means, except that the guardianship of the Father is rejected by launching a terrible accusation against the Jews, that of having killed Christ. It means the myth of Judah announced anti-Semitism, and this is an example, a very beautiful Dutch, Italian painting. And again, my favorite joke is, Jesus looks like an Australian surfer, and Judah looks like a Jew. And why do they stress on Judah? Because Judah means what? Judah means Jews. So the responsible of the death of Jesus is Jew. But the problem is everyone was Jewish then, and especially Jesus, etc. And this is the first fake news. And it heralds anti-Semitism. So Jesus was the victim of a Jewish plot, organized by the devil with the help of a Jew called Judah, and for money. Everything is there. The rest is commentary, if you want. And this is the matrix. Judah, ugliness, conspiracy, and betrayal. Of course, they were all Jewish. Judah, but the rest also. Peter's, whatsoever. And then look how Judah and Jesus looks like. Jesus, a perfect Italian, Dutch, whatsoever. And if you're interested, I will sold, if you want, these beautiful, T-shirts, or if you have iPhones or a poster for your children, you can have it. Everything exists. And this is a good representation. Look, the Jews, not the Romans, are responsible. And why not the Romans? Because the church was taken by, the aristocratic family of Constantinople and Rome. They didn't want their ancestor being responsible of the Christ assassination, crucifixion. And so they say it's the Jews. It's on marketing point of view, it's wonderful. And this is a 13th century Belgian enluminure, and it's explained too. Well, it's a Jewish conspiracy for money. Look, the first one is Judah touching money, selling the blonde Aryan Jesus to Ponce Pilatus. And how is Ponce Pilatus represented? I know I've got no minute, but I don't care. I don't have my glasses. So how is Ponce Pilatus represented? He's a Jew. He's not a Roman. Ponce Pilatus is a Jew. The same there. 13th century English. Look, Jesus, Englishman, and look, Ponce Pilatus, a Jew. And look how the Jews are portrayed. Like, 19th, 20th century anti-Semitic. And it's Middle Age. So everything started in the Middle Age. That's important. And the end, this is how the Jews has to finish. This is the suicide of Judah. And Judah is not a human being. This is unwritten anti-Semitism. Judah is not a human being. He is a beast in the service of the devil, and his soul is taken. It's the child is taken by the devil. There is no way. And this is the difference between anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism, etc. And so anti-Semitism, 19th century, etc. And I will say the difference is it's totally irrational, as you can see. It's a social construction. The neurosis turns into psychosis, and then, of course, it's an obsessive passion. And, of course, during the late Middle Age in Europe, there was full-scale persecution in many places with blood libels, massacre, forced conversion. And the difference is between anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. In anti-Judaism, you despise the religion for what they are. In anti-Semitism, you despise the Jews for what they're not. They're not allies of the devil. They do not poison wells. They don't kill children. They don't spread diseases. And this is when the Jews become responsible for the world. And it's 12th, 13th century, not 19th century. And this is the first massacre. The first massacre occurred in the Middle Age, after the Crusades, not before. Of course, you have persecution in Spain whatsoever. But this is clear. And they're accused, being responsible of Black Death, of killing children, which still exist. You know that today the Israeli army, they like to kill children. But this idea, Palestinian children today, but this idea dates back from the Middle Age. The first occurrence is 12th century. A young kid found death in Norwich in 1144. And then you have hundreds of ritual murder, absurd accusation against the Jews. And this is the start of the myth of the vampire Jew. The Jews, they like money, they suck money, and they suck blood, etc. And then there will be massacre and expulsion. The first expulsion from Europe, I finished. The first, 5 minutes short. The first expulsion of Europe, it's England, 1290. And then 2 centuries after will be Spain, Portugal, 1497. And there will be no Jews in Europe. There will be Jews, of course, in Holland. There will be Jews in north of Italy, certain city of Germany, because Germany, there were 300 different Germanys. It was different states. Of course, there were the Ottoman Empire, and 80% of the Jews lived in Poland. 80% of the Jews in Great Poland, etc. And when you don't have Jews, well, you need scapegoat. And who will be the ideal scapegoat when Jews disappeared? It will be the women, of course. You need people, you need to save God, as Freud has said. How would you save, God? Well, okay, it's not the Jews. Now you have new agent of the devil, it's the women. And this is the witch hunt, which is after the end of Jewish presence in most of European countries, etc. So whatsoever. But not in Spain and not in Portugal. Almost no witch hunt in Spain and Portugal. Why? Because they continue to persecute the Jews. They will still have Jews called, New Christian, etc. And this explains why in Germany you have trial against women and not so much in Portugal and Spain, etc. And so I finished here, more or less. I will show you this one, 3. That's it. The important thing is Judaism, modernity, and evil, and the conspiracy. Modernity was seen by the extreme right, the French extreme right, as a conspiracy against traditional Christian society. You can see the Jews are represented as a bat. Again, Jewish vampire who likes to suck the blood and the money. And he is responsible of what? Of the Judaization of French society. And what is Judaization of French society? It's the modernization. It means if you want to have a modern society, science must replace religion. You have to go on the Christ body, in a sense. This is the image. And look, if you accept it, you will be honored by a French republic. Looks like whom? The French Republic? Look the face of the French Republic. Jew. It's a Jew. So it means modernity, it's Judaism. The same here, more or less. And then 2 more. This is in English. No, it's not in English. It's the white Russian postcards edited to say, please do not emancipate the Jews, because look, this is the price that we paid. We emancipate them, and then 1 more. And it means we had communism, Bolshevism, socialism, propaganda, finance, occultism, unionism, whatsoever, cinema, press, pacifism, you can say, whatever. It means modernity. Of course, the Jews were a beneficiary of modernity, like the women. But according to tradition, of course, the women are not intelligent enough to invent modernity. So it's the Jews who invent modernity, etc. It's really the conspiracy. And the last one is this one. It's in America, 1907. 1907, and look, this is us, or this is US in the hand of the Jews, and the Jews are responsible of Wall Street, republicanism, but also democracy. It means, again, it's an accusation against, of course, against what, modernity is supposed to be, and republicanism. Why? Because, as you know, Abraham Lincoln was a Republican and a Democrat, etc. And then you can see what Judah owes to do to kill himself. So I think I finish here, more or less. Of course, I could speak about racism. Look, this is an American postcards, mocking the fact that he's a Jew marrying American African, etc. And you can see what will the harvest be, etc. But this is another thing, and we have no time. So thank you very much. I'm sorry to be a little bit long. It's too long for my English, my God. Oh.
Okay, so, okay. 1, 2, 3.
3 questions, so I can not answer.
Okay, so thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting. So,
I'm here.
I'm unsure if you've heard of the book, The Therapized Anti-Semite by Christopher Schilling. However, he criticizes the classification of anti-Semitism as a psychosis or, equating it to mental illness. Sorry,
Can you repeat? I'm sorry.
Yes, sorry, over here. So I'm unsure if you're familiar with the book, The Therapized Anti-Semite by Christopher Schilling. However, he criticizes the diagnosis or the classification of anti-Semitism as a psychosis for a number of reasons. For one, it individualizes anti-Semitism rather than viewing it as an objective political phenomenon, so something that's embedded within our institutions and academia, mass media, etc.
I don't know.
And then, accordingly, anti-Semitic attacks are seen as outliers or lone wolves rather than as a predictable manifestation of anti-Semitism or an escalation of the rhetoric.
So who's the author?
Christopher Schilling,
Who is he?
he's a legal scholar.
Where?
Chicago, I think. Sorry,
Honestly, I don't know.
My
Honestly, I don't know.
computer's turned off for some reason. So
Interesting.
I can't bring up my notes, but,
You heard about him?
so, anyways, I'm just wondering how you would respond to the criticisms of classifying anti-Semitism as a psychosis.
I promise I will read him, but I never heard of him. I'm sorry. Seems to be interesting.
Oh, actually, sorry, one more point. Sorry. Also, the term psychosis implies that the view is devoid from reality. However, given how embedded anti-Semitism is within our institutions, I would argue that actually it's a logical reflection of the reality that we're being fed in terms of what's being said about Jews and about Israel.
Okay.
Thank you.
More questions.
Okay. Here. And then Anthony.
Thank you. I guess my question is actually even broader than your presentation. It also applies to the last presentation and to a frustration that I often have when I'm also trying to understand why. So there are so many answers, and I guess my frustration is I think sometimes I just land with, okay, I understand why there's a value to conceptualizing this and understanding it, but just as a Jew living in the world, there are moments where I think, it doesn't matter why, this is the reality. So what do we do? If this is the reason, what do we do?
Thanks. Want to answer?
I understand this
Anthony?
question.
You understand? You want to answer?
No,
You want more? Anthony.
so I can skip. That's why that's important.
Thank you again for the presentation. Leading on from that, so if we take this view of anti-Semitism, which I actually share as being some kind of a mass psychogenic illness, as a phenomenon, are there any interventions from cognitive science literature or therapy literature that have been explored from your research that you would link up? And we might find some novel insights about how to actually intervene from a more practical perspective. The second sort of point I'd make, or I'd like to hear your thoughts on, is does it always make sense to think about it as a causal link between the neurosis and psychosis as you've described it? Because I can think of examples where if you look at anti-Semitism in Asia and maybe the Imperial Japanese anti-Semitism, I've heard it said that there was a belief in many of the anti-Semitic tropes and this sort of like organizational principle that Jews were this nefarious, cabal that were controlling world affairs, and you'll often see it in Chinese propaganda that the Jews control the Anglos, and that's sort of their way of looking at the Jewish Anglosphere. But it's holding Jews up in almost a kind of reverential perspective, and it doesn't necessarily lead to violent anti-Semitism. So you have, in some sense, anti-Semitism without anti-Judaism, which would invert your kind of diagnosis.
So thank you very much for your excellent question. I will try to answer. I think it's important to know the why. I think it's very important. As a scholar, I think you have to, and I will give you one example. Sometimes you can a little bit cure, even if it's difficult. After the Second World War, you have to understand that Shoah occurred also because of the church discourse, the despised discourse, what is called enseignement du mépris. The fact that for years in the catechism, it was said that the Jews killed Jesus, etc. And so there was a reaction after the war. You heard about Jules Isaac, the very famous French historian who wrote a book. And the book, forced the church finally to convene what's called Vatican II, and to accept finally the fact that the Jews were the responsible of the killing of Jesus, and finally, which will made the Vatican accept the reality of Israel and the recognition of Israel. And so it works, you know. It's a very important book, L'enseignement du mépris. I don't know how to say this in English. She can.
Yeah, the teaching of
Harriet.
yeah,
What?
the teaching of just
So he wrote two major books accusing the church being partly responsible of, and you have to know that a lot of, you know, of Nazi, you know, member of the SS had a Catholic, of course, education. And you have to understand this. So the why is important, and that's why I consider, and I hope that once there will be the same attitude of El-Azhar, you know, that you accept also that in Quran you have also, you know, how to say, wording, etc., which bring to contemporary anti-Semitism, etc. I think it's important. Third thing is, and anyway, I'm a scholar, though, so that's why I think the why it's very important. The second thing is, you're right in a sense, and you're wrong, because you know the concept of circulation. Even if the Japanese are not from Christian origin, but I don't think that anti-Semitism is very well spread. But of course, you will find some anti-Semitic example, and some people will say that the Jews control, you know, America, etc. But this is because of circulation, because anti-Semitism is, it's what I said, it's part of Western thought. This is also what Nuremberg spoke about. It's part of it. So they took Hollywood, they took comic strip, and they took a bit of anti-Semitism. Nothing surprising. You know, it belongs to it's culture. And unfortunately, as Nuremberg would say, anti-Semitism is deep-rooted in the Western, I would say, and Muslim psyche. Psyche is the good word in English. Harriet?
It's psychic.
Psyche. Okay. I learned something today. Anyway, it's almost the same. The pronunciation is different. So, and also I would say, and I'm not sure I understand everything, but a psychosis could be collective and individual. You know, DVDs is psychotic, and, you know, or we have a good example. And Germany was certainly, you know, it become, you know, obsessed suddenly. And that's why I'm using this concept of, and actually the psychosis, as I said, was found first by Pinsker in 1981 pamphlet. You know, the first, I would say, Zionist book. 1881. Auto-emancipation, self-emancipation, etc. And he said anti-Semitism is incurable and it's a disease. And I think he was right. I think, and he invented the concept of Judeophobia. And why do I use anti-Semitism? Because it's, even if it's a very bad word, it's an absurd word, but it's used by scholars, and we have to accept it. You know, it's like this, and of course it was invented in the 19th century, but, you know, the concept of genocide was invented in 1942, 1943, and I speak about the genocide of the Armenians. And I speak about the assassination of Julius Caesar, even if assassin, it comes from Arabic, from Hashishin. That's why I think I'm a nominalist, if you know. It means when I wrote, as Raymond Aron would say, I use a word, I define it, and I use it. Maybe I'm wrong. I know David Nuremberg preferred to use anti-Judaism. For me, it's more anti-Semitism. Maybe he's right, but he defined and I define. It's just the way.
So, Joel, I want to push back and bring back the challenge on psychosis. So, you actually said it in your talk that it's good branding. So
Yeah.
Christianity and Islam are expansionist. Christians are obligated to spread the gospel, to bring to save people's souls. Islam is the final word, and they're both expansionist. Edward Said's work is, you know, I think a wonderful example of replacement theology. He's plugging into
Exactly.
the Western anti-Semitic discourse. So is it psychosis, or is it fulfilling the mandate to expand and to use the Jew as something that needs to be replaced, that we have to move further?
Well, it's again a good question. What is important to say that the Jews also were expansionists. You have to forget it. The problem is that at the early time of Roman Empire, no, because they were competing faiths. But you know that a wife of Nero converted to Judaism, etc. It was very attractive. And actually, we won because the first Christian was Jewish. Of course, Judaism was expansionist. You forgot it. And even the end of the Middle Age, they were Christian converted to Judaism. That's why they forbid us to have slaves, Christian slave, pagan slave, etc. So there were a lot. Conversion was so easy before it was forbidden by the church, etc. And before the closure of rabbis. No, we were. But we failed in a sense, and we won because unfortunately Christianity it's a Jewish heresy. So the second thing is, actually I just has the idea. We cannot cure psychosis, but we can cure neurosis. That's why we will succeed in a new dialogue with the Christian church. Now this is very important. Yes, you saw the former Pope, remember. So it means it's the proof that neurosis is, I think, curable. And your question is, it's both, of course. It's instrumentalization and also believing, I think. At the beginning, the Jews were very often protected by the prince. You know, during the first massacre in the Middle Age, some prince tried to protect the Jews. And when they realized it was impossible because they risked their own lives, finally they killed them and they took the money. It means, where's the reality? And you're right about Said. Of course, his replacement, by definition, of course, I suppose he knows he was not the last Jew. But it's well done. They know Asbara better than us, I think.
Charlotte.
Hello, that was brilliant again. It was brilliant last year and brilliant again this time and given me loads of things to think about. But my question is, if you could possibly elaborate a little bit more on how the notion that Jews did not kill Jesus was removed from the church, and if anything can be learned here then for the notion that the Jews poisoned Muhammad and generally wider Islamist anti-Semitism, if there are lessons that could be learned from what happened with the church, and can the same be done?
Yes, it should be done. It's going to be a major task, but I think it will take some time. But maybe there will be peace with Saudi Arabia. But it depends on Netanyahu. Does he want to continue the war until the end, so he can stay prime minister until it's going to be 120? Or is he ready to make peace? I think, I'm sorry, my conviction. So it's possible. There is a shift. Of course, Israel is fighting against 7 countries, but please, Israel is very strong now. Stronger than ever. Though maybe it could be time to make peace.
What was the pivotal moment with the church? Like, what caused them to...
The Holocaust, the terrible Holocaust, they felt guilty. The Shoah is unique. It's something unique, and the silence of the church, the silence. They did nothing. Individuals, some Christian help, but the church as such,
The Holocaust then helped the church. October 7th didn't help Islam.
We have to be confident that it's going to be. It could be changed, and I think there is, and I think you will agree with me when you see the talk you had yesterday with Saudi Arabia, with the Arab, with it means there are some. It's not that it used to be.
Sorry, wasn't it 65 when the Second Vatican Council finally said the Jews?
Yeah.
So we're missing some years between...
Yes, of course, it took time, definitely. It was very difficult for the church to accept their Jewish roots. They were in 19th century, some people pretend that Jesus was not a Jew. He was a Canaanite, he was, I don't know, you have to understand, he was a pure Aryan.
Palestinian.
Or man today is a Palestinian. Of course, I agree.
It's also the height of like a world growing consciousness of civil rights and ethnic identity, and that must have influenced the Vatican's decision as well, as Jewish voices were less about religious shared heritage and ethnic peoplehood.
Also,
But then can
if I may,
they recognize Israel, right? They recognize they did kill Christ, and then 1975. So there's another 10 years.
Also, just for Charlotte's point, Bassam Tibi writes beautifully about Islam and Islamism. His book, Yale University Press, Bassam Tibi. And he argues there's no anti-Semitism in the Islamic world. There's discrimination against Jewish.
No, anti-Judaism.
There's anti-Judaism,
Of
but there's
course.
not anti-Semitism.
No, it's not.
The church
Till
was-
the 19th century.
So it's interesting. So I think there's.
Till the 19th century.
So I think
I agree.
the Middle East is different than Europe.
No, but anti-Judaism was the case of the Vatican. You don't need to be. It was not anti-Semitic too.
I think it's
it means.
different in the Islamic
No, no,
world.
it's the same.
The same?
Yeah, I will.
They're also neurotic.
Of course, but definitely. Of course.
You wanted to ask a question? No? Okay.
So if it, others have said that it's a disease, like you say, but it mutates all the time.
Yes, exactly.
Many say it's a disease, but that it mutates all the time.
Like
So-
a disease.
So if it's a disease that is mutating, if we find one cure to it here, then it's gonna mutate, and we're gonna have to find another cure to it here. And I also, so like, I don't know how we're supposed, yeah, I guess I'm looking for guidance on that. And I'm also asking another question. You said you're not a believer, so maybe you don't have an answer for this question. But is there a Torah or rabbinic reason for why Jews will be hated forever throughout time? I don't know the answer. Is there an answer to that?
If there is a rabbi,
There are metaphysical discussions about that.
of course, it's because they behave badly. This is always there. Of course, you know, they were punished.
No.
They were punished. It's so easy. Okay, there are many people who can comment it.
Hold on here.
Okay. After.
Thank you. See, when we say anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, first of all, in the first instance, why did the Catholic Church start in the first place, or Christianity? Before, humanity was being ruled by power and war, and now when humanity was getting civilized, the world realized that the only thing that rules the people is the philosophy of the mind. Yeah, there's no more war. And now the rulers of the world sat back and looked at it. Who got this philosophy? The Jews, Israel. And how can we? Because if they leave the Jews, and that is what the Torah says, that the Jews will rule the world. Because at the end of the whole thing, the truth will, the card will be laid on the table. And who owns the card? The Jews. So Rome understood that our wars cannot win the people anymore. So what should we do? Let's steal the philosophy of the Jews. That is how the New Testament, what the started. Let's steal their philosophy and make it ours. So the Romans, what they did was take the Gemara, take everything, juggle it, take a few things off, put their stuff off, and exported it to the world. Now, that is why when they started banning the Jews doing it, because the world, everybody was enslaved, and only the Jews have one day, they say everybody should rest. The master and the slave. So everybody of the world was tending to the Jews. So if they leave it some years down the line, everybody will ally to the Jews. So the Roman Empire stole the philosophy of the Jews. And that's how anti-Semitism. Yeah, they know I'm saying the truth here, that's why they cut off the mic. So they stole it and made it there. So when you go to the root of it, it is anti-Semitism centuries back. Because it is not anti-Judaism here now, this is what is happening. They forecast into the future, thousands of years down the line, what will be happening? Imagine if there was no Christianity. Imagine if there was nobody thinking that the holy place is Rome or Vatican. The whole world thinks it's Jerusalem. It will be different. So the Christians, the early Christians, the Roman, not Christians, the Roman Empire stole the philosophy, what the the prophets spoke about. They stole it and changed it, and that is what is ruling the world, and that is where this whole thing happened. But at the end of the days, the cards will be laid on the table, and the whole world will return to where it belongs. Thank you.
We're almost out of time, so I'll make this fast. I'm responding to Rona.
You want to ask a question? Feel free. We don't have.
You want to comment?
We have a few minutes.
Yeah, I want to comment. Rona, there are many interpretations that could engage with your question, but my personal favorite has to do with a tradition that starts with Abraham, and the notion that Abraham's covenant with God was one of otherness, and one of being destined to be different from the rest of the world that he was living in. And that from generations and various periods, we have inherited the tradition of being other from society because of our covenant both with God and to the condition itself of otherness. And it could also explain the notion that a Jew in France feels for a Jew in Israel, feels for a Jew in Ethiopia, that we are all Jews feeling for one another, and that the pain of the poor Jew is equivalent to the pain of the rich Jew. So a spiritual answer could actually be the condition itself of being a Jew is tied to isolation from the rest of the world, and that anti-Semitism is just a manifestation of that as a cultural code that we can use to make sense of what's really a more metaphysical or mystical experience.
Any final, ladies, please? No? Any final questions or comments?
Or else we go to lunch.
All right. So Joel, on behalf of everybody, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
So lunch is being served. Enjoy.
No problem. Thank you very much.